All right, everybody, welcome back. Much anticipated part 4. Sorry this took so long to get out. All right, so I'm going through and I've already polished the crank. You saw that in part 3. And now we're test fitting the bearings. And then we're going to install the girdle with the crank. And we're going to run some plastic gauge to verify our clearances are good. Alright, I'm going to run the girdle down. I'm going to follow the factory torque specs in order with my torque wrench. And you don't want to turn the crank at all when you do this. You want to just torque it down and then back it off and take a look at your clearances. And you're going to see me do that here in just a second. Alright, I'm just wiping off the plastic gauge. Everything checked out good. I'm going to take this back out, put it back on my table there. You see an organized table I've got set up. And then we're going to continue getting the motor prepped to put together. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hone the cylinders out just by hand. Lubricated the walls really good, used a stone and honed it out. Now I'm going to wash the motor down really good and get it prepped for paint. Now I'm using compressed air to blow all the water out. And then in a second here, you're going to see me pull out some brake cleaner, and I'm going to spray it down with brake cleaner really good. I'm wiping the cylinder walls out with oil just to keep them from flash rusting. All right, so now I'm heating up the connecting rods on the small eye end where the wrist pin goes through. I'm checking my iPad. I've got the all data pulled up for the right positioning of the piston because the D16Y8 has oil squirters on the connecting rods, and you want to make sure that the pistons are positioned properly for that. So double check that before you put these on, because once they're on, you're not getting them off without doing some damage to those pistons. Alright, up next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fit the piston rings, check the end gap on the compression rings, double checking to make sure that they're not too tight. The manual does have a spec. If you're going to run the turbo application, a lot of guys will open that up just a little bit more because it gets so much more heat and it expands so much more. So they don't pop a head off a piston, which can very well happen. I'm running natural aspiration here. This is basically a stock refresh, so I'm just setting it to stock specs. But the rings are directional on the compression rings. You want to verify in the manual. Sometimes one top edges or bottom edge is tapered. You want to make sure you follow what the manual calls for. And you want to make sure two things. You want to make sure that your compression rings gap are 180 degrees off of each other. And in Honda's case, they actually call out where they want those gaps to be, what position and relative to the cylinder bore. So I'm just going through the manual. I use all data. And I'm double checking that to make sure that those are aligned where I want them to be. All right, just clean some stuff up. I installed the bearing on the connecting rod and then the piston rings. Again, verifying against the manual. I use all data just to make sure that things are exactly where I want them to be. I'm going to take two pieces of hose you're going to see here in just a second, and I put them over the studs on the connecting rod because when I drop that down in the bore, I don't want to scratch the bore up at all. So I've got my ring compressor on, drop them in the bore from the bottom, or from through the top out the bottom, and then I take off my hoses once I've got them in there. So I use little 3/8 4-inch fuel line and just cover those threads up on those studs just to keep from scratching up the bore. Okay, I am cleaning up the block where the main bearings go, and then I'm going to lubricate them up, pre-lube, using an assembly lubricant here. I can't remember what brand that is, but I think it's Permatex. And then install the crankshaft. Now I'm going to connect the connecting rods to the crank. With the girdle in, it's really, really hard to get to those. It's not really a great option, so I'll get those installed, and then I'll rotate the crank, as you see me do here, and I'll get all 4 of them installed, get all the caps on, and then I'll put the girdle on. Okay, I'm torquing down the connecting rods to spec. It's a low, I've got a couple different torque wrenches, but it's a low foot-pound of torque, so I don't use my big one. This is just a 3/8 drive torque wrench. And then what you see me doing here is installing the thrust washer between the crank and the block. I think I'm just verifying a few things here. All right, now I'm getting the girdle ready. Get it all cleaned up. Putting the bearings in on the girdle side, and then we'll get the girdle installed. Okay, torquing the girdle down. Again, following the specs of the manual, both order and torque amount, so it's a stepped torque. You lower torque at first, and then 2 or 3 steps to get up to where the spec is. All right, so what I just flashed there for a second was Honda Bond. I don't really use black RTV, normal like Permatex you buy at the local auto parts stores. I like to use Honda Bond or Suzuki Bond. Personally, I think it works so much better. It's more expensive, but the quality is far superior, and I never have problems with leaks. So if you're doing a project like this, or an oil pan gasket or valve cover gasket on something putting on the vehicle, Honda Bond or Suzuki Bond work phenomenal. So just putting on the rear main seal cover. That's what I put the Honda Bond on. So just tighten that up now and get that installed. All right, time for the front oil pump. Cleaning it real good. Again, using a good brake clean solvent to clean and dry that surface so that your Honda Bond or any RTV that you decide to use is gonna adhere well and prevent leaks. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just prepping the new oil pump, the front of the block, and I'm gonna get that oil pump installed. Again, I'm verifying specs for torque. It's aluminum, you gotta be really, really careful. Some people go and just crank on them and it just pulls the threads out of the block. It's just not good. So oil pickup tubes now installed. Continuing to assemble this bottom end. Okay, just prep the block and the oil pan for the O-ring. So the O-rings can be really good and really bad. Sometimes they don't want to stay in their groove. This isn't a really tight fitting O-ring here, so it wants to move around and come out, and I've got to invert this thing to put it down, and it's not going to want to stay in place. So what I've gone ahead and done is put some Honda Bond inside that groove, and then there's 4 points in the block where you need to put some kind of RTV or Honda Bond so that when the O-ring sits down, the unevenness in the oil pump and the rear main seal cover, well, there's going to be some unevenness there. It helps prevent leaks. So that's oil pans on now, and tighten it down. All right, flip the engine over. I'm going to prep to install the cylinder head. So the D16Y8 the stock head gasket's an MLS gasket. It's a multi-layer steel gasket. So you'll hear a couple different options for this. Honda will tell you not to put anything on it. Just install the multi-layer steel gasket the way it is. That black coating that's on it actually provides a little bit of a prep surface to seal it really good. But if you have any, questions like whether how flat your deck is, multi-layer gaskets are very, very sensitive to that surface and that surface prep. They actually call out like a certain level of prep that they want to have on that deck and the head. If you're unsure, you can use copper spray gasket over the top of that. A lot of guys will do that, and it helps to ensure that you get good sealing all the way around between the water jackets and the cylinder bores, so that you don't get compression pumping in the cooling system. Okay, this is a stepped torque process, just like it was for the crank girdle. When you're dealing with aluminum, there's going to be built up stresses, so they always want to start in the center point. So you'll see that 9 times out of 10, they're starting at the center point and working their way out in a stepped process to relieve that strain and push that outward. So we're going to get the cam installed here, get it all lubed up, get the lost motion assembly on, and continue to assemble this cylinder head. Okay, there's a lost motion assembly going on. Bolts pass through the rocker assembly, which has the rocker arms on it, and then everything squeezes down. Okay, we're now assembling the front of the motor, water pump, timing belt, the covers, the tensioner assembly. So we'll just let you watch through this. After I install timing belts, I like to get everything aligned, install the belt, and then rotate the engine a few times, and then double check the alignment. And then I'll tighten the tensioner down here because it's a spring-loaded tensioner with the pinch bolt. So get it all moving, make sure the tension's right, and then tighten the bolt down. And then I'm going to install the covers here in just a second. All right, time to adjust the valve. So take that top cover back off, and we're gonna check the intake and exhaust valve. Now I get a special tool here that you can buy it on Amazon. It's basically got a nut driver and a flathead screwdriver, so you can loosen the jam nut, adjust the valve to set your clearance, and then hold the adjuster, and then tighten the jam nut back down. All right, I don't have the footage for whatever reason, but I painted the engine block and the valve cover. I just sprayed them with a high temp paint. It's pretty corrosive out here in Ohio, and the block wasn't looking pretty, so I just painted it. And then what I did is I buffed the Honda letters off and then took it back down to aluminum, and you'll see that in a little bit later here. So now I'm installing the intake. So trying to get the engine back in a full assembly is with harness and everything, so it's much easier to drop in, because trying to fish some of this stuff from inside the car is a real pain. So I want to try and put it together the way I took it out. All right, looks like the breather's on. It's the breather cap there, and the PCV valve goes into that. Again, this is all under the intake manifold, which when you're in the car, it can be much harder to do. So I want to get that stuff done while it's out. Intake manifolds on. I ran the harness bracket and part of the harness. I'm going to continue to run this harness down and around and through where it belongs. All right, it's a new day. We got the engine up on the hoist. We're taking the stand bracket off. We're going to install the flywheel clutch, trans, and then the assembly will be ready to go back in the car. Okay, motor is dropped in. I'm tightening down the rear mount and work my way through and gradually get everything back, basically the reverse of the way I took it out. Run the harness down through underneath the back of the battery tray where it goes into the operator compartment, and then get everything buttoned up and crank through this. Okay, top side's pretty much dialed. I'm going to jack the car back up on stands. I'm going to start installing the axles, the shift linkage, basically button up the bottom half. Cam's doing a double check, verifying everything, topping off fluids, make sure everything's good, ready for start. We'll get the car jacked up, get the wheels on, get her down, and then it's time for the first start. Well, folks, that's a wrap. So I rebuilt this engine 4th of July weekend 2017. And as of May 30th, 2021, that car is still on the road. So anybody who's watched this video saying, oh, it ain't going to last, ain't going to last. It had 260,000 miles on it when I rebuilt that engine. And it's got well over 300,000 now, so.
Hi! I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe and like the video down here. And to watch another video, click over here. Thank you, and bye.